Why was it that no one noticed her, until suddenly everyone did? The desert sun hammered down on Fort, not shining so much as burning. Heat bounced off the baked earth and corrugated metal walls until the air itself shimmered. Even the wind, when it came, carried dust like grit on sandpaper, scouring exposed skin and leaving a taste of iron on the tongue. In the far corner of the base, tucked away where no one lingered unless ordered, the ammo depot squatted low and heavy. That suited just fine. She knelt beside an open crate, her gloved hands moving with patient precision. Brass-cased rounds slid into foam dividers, one after the other. Turn, press, turn, press. It was the kind of rhythm she could do blindfolded. The kind of work that kept her invisible. And she preferred invisible. Overhead, a transport helicopter flung dust into the yard as it touched down on the far pad. Orders barked, boots thudded, engines whined and faded. The depot awning shaded just enough that she could see without being seen. Every so often, a sweep of binoculars glinted from the observation tower. Routine. Security teams never forgot the yard. But today the sweeps lingered longer. Seconds stretched in her direction before moving on. She kept her hands steady. She didn't look up. The trick was never to acknowledge the eyes. 3 days ago, in a briefing she wasn't meant to hear, she had crouched in the corner of the depot adjusting a supply harness when Colonel Hale's voice carried through the thin wall. Western Gap is the breach point. Movement at 300, that's your window. Then a pause. Words too low for her to catch, but it had been enough. She filed it away, unreadable on her face. Since then, glances had lingered on her longer than usual. From across the yard, a sharp voice cut through the heat. Not a greeting, a summons. She turned slightly. Sergeant Kent, square-jawed, uniform damp with sweat, strode toward her with two privates trailing behind, each lugging bags of empty shell casings. He planted himself just inside her space, as though he owned the ground beneath her. "You're supposed to have the 7.62s crated by 1600, he said. "They'll be ready." Her voice was calm, her eyes flicking briefly to the clock bolted under the depot roof. She was an hour ahead of schedule. Kent's gaze dragged over the neat stacks at her side, then back to her long sleeves despite the heat. "You hiding frostbite under there?" She didn't answer, just slotted another round into place. His smirk lingered a moment longer, then he jerked his chin toward the privates. "Make sure these get logged, and watch her count. She's got quick hands." The remark wasn't about speed anymore. It was about trust, or the lack of it. When they moved on, caught motion in her periphery. From the open gate leading to the command strip, a figure approached. Pressed fatigues, mirrored sunglasses, Colonel Hale. He walked like the heat didn't touch him, every stride deliberate, boots landing in a rhythm that hushed conversations along his path. Even a forklift's reverse beep stuttered silent as he passed. He stopped near the depot's shade line. He didn't speak, didn't even move close. He simply scanned the stacks of crates before letting his gaze settle on her for a beat too long. Behind the sunglasses, she couldn't read his eyes. She didn't need to. She'd seen that look before, once, years ago, in a place no one here would believe she'd been. His radio crackled. He lifted it, gave a clipped reply, and turned away. No words for her, not yet. She breathed out slowly, sealing another crate. The rhythm of clinking brass and shifting shadows carried her through the rest of the shift. When the sun dipped low enough to cut the glare, she closed the lid on the last crate, stamped it with the depot stencil, and logged the serials on her clipboard. Paper, not digital. Paper never crashed. Paper couldn't be remotely accessed. She slid the clipboard back into its holder just as another shadow fell across the table. One of the senior NCOs from Perimeter Detail. Unlike Kent, his voice carried no edge. "Got a shipment of 40 mics coming in," he said. "We'll need your hands." "When?" "Now, North Gate." She nodded once, pulled her gloves, tugging each finger into place with practiced precision, and followed him into the sun. The convoy rolled in under a haze of dust. Flatbeds rumbling, straps cinched tight, and moved to meet them, guiding the first truck into the unloading bay. As the lift crew swarmed the pallets, stayed beside her. "You ever work with ordnance outside the wire?" he asked casually. "Yeah." "Where at?" She kept her eyes on the straps, her voice even. "Different places." He chuckled under his breath. "That's a non-answer if I've ever heard one." She didn't respond. Instead, she stepped forward, catching the crate's weight with practiced ease, shifting her stance to counterbalance its momentum. The kind of motion only someone with more than depot training knew. If noticed, he didn't say. When the last pallet thudded onto the dirt, they walked back toward the depot. Dust swirled in the air, catching the fading sunlight. "You know Kent's gunning for you, right?" said. Made a noncommittal sound. "Guy got a long memory for people who make him look slow, and he's been talking to Hale about you." Her silence was answer enough. By the time she returned to her station, the sky had gone gold. Long shadows stretched across the yard. From the depot's edge, she could see the square of reflected sky in Hale's office window. Too far to read inside, but close enough to know he'd seen her. Twice today. And each time something shifted. In places like this, attention was currency. She had just been handed more than she'd asked for. The following afternoon, the yard simmered like a furnace. She carried another crate across the gravel, her pace steady, her collar damp with sweat. The smell of oil, dust, and cordite hung heavy, familiar, almost comforting in its way. She set the crate down in the armory. Behind the counter, Lieutenant Kent, hair in a regulation-type bun, fatigue blouse pressed so stiff it could cut glass. A tablet flickered in her hand, her eyes sharp, cool. "I need to inspect your lot of M995 AP rounds," said. Kent arched a brow. "And who exactly sent you?" "Standard condition check. Those rounds don't travel well if they've been stored wrong." "This armory isn't self-serve. Requests go through command. Command hasn't sent anyone." "Then log it preventive. I'll be out of your way in 2 minutes." Kent's lips curled faintly, not quite a smile. "You're not on the list." Didn't flinch, she just lifted the crate again. "Understood." Outside, sunlight stabbed her eyes. She adjusted quickly, boots crunching gravel. To anyone else, it was nothing more than a clerk following protocol. But to her, it was confirmation. Something in supply chain wasn't clean. She cut through the refueling area, rows of metal drums and fuel bladders standing in the heat. The chemical bite of aviation fuel was sharp in her nose. And then she saw it. One drum, its strap slack, rear latch half closed. A few more gusts, a careless bump, and it would tip. She set down the crate, tightened the strap, drove the pin home until it clicked. Less than 30 seconds and the knot in her gut loosened. Only slightly. Minutes later, the alarm wailed. Not the long rising call of an attack, just 3 urgent pulses. She ran toward the maintenance sheds. Smoke curled from an open bay. 2 soldiers dragged an extinguisher inside. The charred remains of a fuel hose lay across the floor. Small fire, already dying, but she knew what should have happened. That unsecured drum she'd strapped down sat 10 meters away. If it had fallen, the vapors alone could have turned the shed into a base-wide evacuation. Across the bay, Staff Sergeant leaned against a tool rack. No smirk on his face, just eyes locked on her. She broke the stare first, walked away. By the time the sun sank into copper dusk, she stood in the yard again. A pair of heavy ammo boxes hooked in her hands. Voices drifted from the command tent ahead. She hadn't been invited inside. Logistics didn't get called into nerve centers unless something had gone very wrong, but she passed close enough to listen. Lieutenant Kent's voice, sharp, clipped. "Western Gap is our least defended sector. It's narrow, under-patrolled. We move a detachment through, we cut hours off our infiltration." Reply low, restless. "Or we walk into a funnel, high ridges, zero cover if they're waiting." "They're not waiting. Intel shows no heat signatures." Intel can be wrong. Slowed just enough to catch the tension, the clash between maps and mud, theory and practice. She shifted her path to skirt the tent's side flap. A map sprawled across the table inside. Red lines, blue markers, enemy positions, and something else. Fine gray hatching just north of the gap. Faint lines almost lost in the lamplight. She knew what they were. Old bunkers, demolished on paper, but paper rarely matched reality. Her pace carried her past the tent, but her chest tightened. The wind tugged her shirt like a warning. Knox. She turned. Colonel Hale walked toward her from the far side of the tent, broad-shouldered, sleeves rolled, his pale blue eyes fixed on her as though he'd just made a decision mid-step. She set the boxes down, sir. He studied her, weighing something invisible. Your logistics. Currently. What were you doing near the command tent? Moving supplies. You heard them. She didn't deny it. I heard enough to know the Western Gap isn't what they think. Appeared behind him, brow furrowed. Kent too, her face taut. Hale's voice sharpened. Explain. She crouched, set one box aside, and raised a hand, tracing an invisible line in the air. Half a click north of the gap, there's a grid of subsurface bunkers. Official maps scrubbed them years ago, but they're still there. Perfect staging ground for an ambush. Kent bristled. They were demolished 8 years ago. They weren't. His voice was steady. And if I were planning an ambush, I'd wait inside them. No heat signature until you're already in the kill zone. The silence stretched. The weight of it pressed down harder than the desert heat. How do you know this? Hale asked. For a long beat, she didn't answer. Then, with 2 fingers, she pulled her collar aside just enough for crimson fabric to catch the fading light. A black insignia, sharp and unmistakable. Echo red. The air shifted. Eyes widened. Kent's narrowed. Somewhere in the yard, a loose sheet of metal rattled in the wind. Hale's gaze fixed on the patch, his voice even but edged. I see. Let the collar fall back. If you want your people to come back from this mission, Colonel, you'll reroute them. He didn't move, didn't speak, just weighed her for another long moment, then gave the smallest nod. We'll talk. And without another word, he turned back toward the tent. What was it about the crate that felt wrong? The yard bustled in the late afternoon, soldiers moving in practiced rhythm, forklifts whining, boots crunching gravel. Heat still radiated from the ground, though the sun had begun to tilt west, its light turning pale gold. Worked methodically, checking serial numbers, sealing latches, sliding her gloved hand across each surface with the unhurried precision of someone who'd done this too many times to count. It was ordinary, predictable, safe. Until it was. Her hand stilled on the cool metal of a crate that felt just slightly off. The weight was fine, the lock unbroken. But beneath her palm she felt it, a faint vibration. Not sound exactly. More like the memory of sound, a low hum that her skin registered even if her ears didn't. She crouched, pressing her hand flat. The sensation was steady, deliberate, alive. She glanced across the yard. Soldiers were busy with other loads, none paying her any mind. She shifted the crate subtly, bracing her boots into the dirt. With one swift motion, she popped the latch. The hinges groaned, the lid lifting on a hiss of pneumatic resistance. Inside, rows of olive drab packages nestled into foam. Standard C4 blocks. Nothing unusual, nothing that would make her pulse tighten. Except, in the corner of the second row, tucked between explosives like a snake hiding in tall grass, sat a small rectangular device. A digital face glowed, steady red numbers counting down. 14 minutes, 32 seconds. Her pulse didn't spike. Her breathing didn't stutter. Training buried deep took over, pulling her mind into a sharper gear. Whoever had packed this hadn't wired it for impact. This was timed. Intentional. A message, or worse, a massacre waiting to happen. She reached for her radio, then stopped. A base-wide alert would mean chaos. Men shouting, running, jostling equipment. The wrong bump could turn 14 minutes into none. Her voice was low but edged with steel. Across the yard, Staff Sergeant straightened, catching the tone before the word. He jogged toward her, boots pounding against hard-packed earth. When he reached her side, she shifted just enough for him to see inside the crate. The blood drained from his face. Jesus, is that? C4 with a live timer. 14 minutes, said evenly. His jaw tightened. If this gets loaded onto the bird, it takes half the yard with it. Around them, life at Fort carried on as if nothing ticked beneath their feet. Forklifts beeped. Soldiers cursed over paperwork. Engines coughed on idle. All unaware that one crate away from catastrophe, time was bleeding out. Muttered, we need EOD. They'll take 10 minutes to get here, maybe more, we have 14. He stared at her like she was out of her mind. You're not seriously. But she was already kneeling, stripping her gloves off, bare fingers steadier than steel tools. The device was no bigger than a deck of cards, but its wires were twisted, looped deliberately to make removal difficult. Red, black, yellow, green, and a false strand woven like a trap. She traced each one with her eyes, memorizing their paths. Hold the lid steady, she said. Obeyed, his breath sharp, his eyes darting across the yard as if expecting the device to explode simply from being seen. His multi-tool flicked open in her hand. She worked in silence, isolating the false wire, tugging it clear from its nest. The setup wasn't standard. Someone had done this with a personal touch, the kind meant to trick anyone who thought they knew the rules. She felt his breath on her shoulder, shallow, tense. You've done this before. Her voice was barely a whisper, once or twice. The red wire teased free. She anchored it with a strip of tape. Then, in one clean motion, she cut the black. The timer stuttered, flickered, died. Silent, save for the faint thrum of helicopter rotors spinning up in the distance. She exhaled slowly, slipping the dead device into a blast-resistant pouch hidden in the crate wall. Each box carried one, meant for delicate components. Most soldiers repurposed them for lunches or spare socks. Not her. Closed the lid with a careful hand. His voice was rough, low. You just saved every man in this yard. Before she could answer, a shadow fell over them. Colonel Hale. He stood with arms crossed, two officers lingering behind him. His eyes dropped to the pouch in his hand. Explain. Started, sir, the crate was. Timer cut in. Her voice was level. 14 minutes to detonation. It would have gone airborne in 5. Hale's gaze lingered on her, weighing, measuring. Then he took the pouch from her hand, turned it once in his palm, and passed it off to one of the officers. Dispose of it. The officer vanished with the bundle. The other stayed, watching her with sharp suspicion. Hale's voice came quieter, though it carried across the yard. Do you make a habit of dismantling live explosives in the middle of my depot? She met his eyes. Only when someone else makes a habit of arming them. For a heartbeat, something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, not yet. You're coming with me, he said finally. Command tent now. Fell into step as they crossed the yard. Soldiers paused to watch them pass, their eyes no longer indifferent, some curious, some wary, all of them aware that something had shifted. Inside the tent, the map still sprawled wide across the table. Officers bent over its ridges and valleys, markers scattered like pieces on a chessboard. Lieutenant Kent straightened sharply when she saw them enter. Hale didn't waste time. Just prevented this base from becoming a crater. You're going to hear her out. Every head turned. Doubt, curiosity, a flicker of something heavier. Stepped forward, her fingertips brushing the edge of the map. She let her shadow fall over the western gap. That route is a death trap. Kent's lips parted. With respect, you've been on this base 3 days, our intel. You're looking at what they want you to see. She reached for a faded overlay from the stack, laid it across the map. Faint symbols appeared, dots, hatch marks almost invisible, vent shafts, bunkers. Kent's voice sharpened. Even if that's true, those tunnels haven't been used in years. Didn't look up. They don't need to be. The ground itself is honeycombed, perfect for concealment, perfect for ambush. The tent stilled. The silence was thicker than the heat trapped under canvas. Hale's eyes stayed on her. How do you know this? She didn't answer right away. Her hand rose, slow and deliberate, pulling her collar aside just enough for the crimson fabric to flash in the lamplight. The black insignia stitched there, blade and wing, stylized, unmistakable, was not supposed to exist anymore. Echo Red. Every officer in the tent knew the name, even if they'd never admitted it aloud. A ghost unit, a rumor that appeared in classified briefings and nowhere else. Kent's voice faltered. That unit was dissolved. Let the collar fall back, her voice steady. Echo Red isn't dissolved. It completes its directive or it doesn't come back at all. The air shifted. Doubt gave way to something else. Hale nodded once. You're saying we avoid the Western Gap, where instead? She circled a northern sector with a grease pencil. Rugged terrain, broken ridges, narrow passes, harder, slower, but safe. Kent leaned in. There's no ingress point documented there. There is, said, a maintenance shaft cut into the cliff face, hidden under a rock slide. You'd never notice unless you knew the shadow to look for, and only in the last light before sunset. Hale's voice turned decisive. We reconfigure around it. And you, his eyes locked onto hers, sharp and unblinking, will brief the unit yourself. Kent drew breath to object, but Hale raised a hand. Lieutenant, she prevented an explosion in our yard. Now she's steering us away from a kill zone. That's enough to earn her a voice at this table. The words hit like a gavel. The officers exchanged glances, recalculating the measure of the quiet woman who had arrived days ago with nothing but a crate of rounds and long sleeves against the sun. For the first time since she'd stepped onto this base, was not invisible, but she knew better than to mistake visibility for safety. The map lay before her. The fate of the mission was shifting, and every eye in the tent waited for her next word. Why did the hangar suddenly choke with smoke, just when everything had been prepared? The map still sprawled across the command table, a topographic quilt of ridges and valleys, blue and red markers scattered like pieces in a game too costly to lose. Colonel Hale had given his decision. Her plan would shape the operation. No further debate, no hesitation. His word cut like steel. But decisions on paper were only the beginning. Outside the tent, the desert sun burned harsh against metal siding and sand. Strode across the yard at her side, soldiers turning their heads as she passed, not with the casual dismissal of days before, but with a wary focus. Eyes measured her now, judged her. At the equipment racks, she began with the rifles. Pull the HK-416s, she told the armorer, short barrels suppressed. The man glanced at, uncertain, only nodded once. That was enough. From there she moved down the line. Optics, spare magazines, comms stripped to bare essentials. She vetoed heavy plate carriers, choosing lighter rigs, mobility over coverage. It wasn't a choice that won friends, but it kept people alive underground. 3 smoke canisters each, she told the munitions clerk. 2 white, 1 yellow, white for cover, yellow for extraction signal, no frags. The clerk frowned. No frags. No unnecessary noise, she said flatly. Explosives echo underground. You want the enemy to know you're coming, carry grenades. Muttered under his breath, Echo Red doctrine. She didn't look up from the manifest. Echo Red survival rate. By the 40-minute mark, gear was laid out in rows across the tarmac. Fire teams stood by their kits, watching her pace through one last circuit. She stopped in front of the youngest private, a boy who looked barely out of school, his harness hanging loose on narrow shoulders. Without comment, she adjusted his straps herself, tightened his chin buckle until the helmet sat firm. "If you feel wind on your left in a tunnel," she told him quietly, "you're near a vent shaft. That means you're exposed. Move faster." The boy nodded, eyes wide, as if the weight of her words pressed heavier than his gear. Across the yard, Lieutenant Kent stood near Colonel Hale, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. He said nothing. Neither did she. They simply watched. The briefing was short. No slides, no handouts, just the map, her voice, and the weight in her tone. "We're not going to prove how loud we can be," she said evenly. "We're going to extract hostages without alerting half the valley. That means you check your corners before you move. You check your six before you breathe. And you follow calls like your life depends on it, because it does." Her gaze swept the room, pausing on each soldier long enough to make spines straighten. "If we split, fall back to the rendezvous. If you can't, haul up and wait for extraction. No hero plays. The people we're bringing back don't care how it looks. They care that you return alive." It wasn't rousing. It wasn't meant to be. It was blunt, solid, the kind of voice soldiers trusted when the walls closed in. When she stepped back into the light, the first team was already loading their gear into armored transports. Engines rumbled. The air itself felt heavier. That was when the sound broke the rhythm. A metallic clatter. Heads turned. A grenade canister rolled across the hangar floor, clinking once before coming to rest near a young private's boots, its pin half pulled. The color on the casing wasn't frag green, it was gray. Smoke muttered just as the canister hissed. White fog bloomed with violent hunger, curling across the floor, swallowing boots, crates, rifles. Within seconds, the air turned opaque. Visibility dropped to a meter. Coughing erupted. Shouts tangled. "Kill the fans," she snapped. A corporal lunged toward the control panel, fumbling for the cutoff. Too late. The vent system was already jammed. The smoke clung to the floor, heavy, rolling, alive. Chaos was seconds away. "Squad leaders on me." Her voice cut sharp through the haze, pulling silhouettes toward her like a beacon. Emerged first, his bulk distorted in the fog. Kent followed, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. Two more officers stumbled close. She didn't waste words. She didn't shout. Her tone carried like steel through the muffled air. "West exit, single file, hand on the shoulder ahead. No breaks, no runs." A beat of hesitation, then Kent's voice, taut but disciplined. "What about the crates?" "They're not breathing," said flatly. "People first." She clapped arm. "You lead, easiest to track by feel." Without another word, she fell to the rear, becoming the anchor. One by one, blurred forms stretched into a line, each soldier clutching the shoulder ahead. They moved like shadows through fog. Halfway out, one private stumbled. His silhouette pitched forward, gear clattering. His hand shot out, seizing his harness in a firm grip, yanking him upright in one smooth motion. She didn't comfort. She just shoved him forward. Momentum was survival. Then a voice behind, weak coughing, "Help, I can't." Didn't hesitate. "Take them out, Kent, with me." They broke from the line, plunging deeper into haze. The smoke clawed at eyes and throats. Kept one hand on the wall, navigating by memory of the layout. Her boot struck a workbench, then the open space beyond. The private crouched low, helmet tilted, clutching a crate like a lifeline. "Leave it," said. He released it instantly, clinging instead to her arm. She pulled him upright, Kent grabbing his other side. Together, they dragged him back toward the west exit. Sunlight stabbed like a blade as they emerged into open air. The team staggered into the yard, coughing, blinking. No one down, no one lost. "Form up in the shade," ordered, her voice steady. "Hydrate, eyes on me." Then she turned back. Inside, the hangar still boiled with smoke. She circled to the armory's side door, wrenched it open, and created a cross breeze. Slowly, stubbornly, the fog thinned. When she stepped out again, Colonel Hale was waiting. He studied the hangar, the soldiers, then her. "That could have gone differently," he said. Yes, sir. No shouting, no wasted motion. You didn't lose anyone. She didn't answer. He tilted his head, eyes sharp. That's twice now I've seen you stop disaster before it started. It wasn't just me, she said quietly, nodding toward Kent. Leadership never is, Hale replied. But it starts with someone who doesn't freeze when the air turns thick. By the time the last of the smoke cleared, the gear was rechecked, the lost minutes recovered. Soldiers moved with sharper discipline now, their earlier nerves burned away with the haze. Engines roared again. The convoy lined up at the gate. Hale stepped forward, raising his voice just enough for the team to hear. This mission is dangerous, but after what I've seen, I know one thing. This team is safe in our hands. Every eye turned too. She didn't speak, didn't posture. She simply adjusted her harness, checked her rifle sling, and said one word. Mount up. Engines growled, tires crushed gravel. The convoy rolled toward the northern ridge. The desert swallowed the sound of their departure, leaving Fort quieter than before, as though the base itself held its breath. But the mission was only beginning. Why did the canyon wall look solid when she knew it was anything but? The northern face of the ridge stretched jagged and shadowed, a wall of stone scraped bare by centuries of desert wind. From a distance, it looked impenetrable, just another rise of rock among dozens. To anyone else, there was no path forward, but had memorized this terrain years before, when she wore a different uniform, answered to a different name, and bore the crimson patch no one was supposed to see. The convoy rolled to a stop 2 kilometers short of the ridge. Engines cut off one by one, heat ticking out of their hoods, leaving only the whisper of wind brushing over sand. Dust settled, thinning into the dry air. Soldiers shifted in their gear, the nervous silence heavier than the desert heat. Dropped to one knee beside. She unrolled a hand-drawn overlay across her thigh, anchoring it with a gloved palm against the restless breeze. Her fingertip traced a narrow slash of white ink between 2 jagged boulders. We ascend here, she said, her voice steady, deliberate. Looks like a cliff face from a distance. It is. Think of it as a ladder the earth never finished carving. The holds are there if you know where to look. 3 meters between climbers. If someone slips, the fall ends with them, not the man below. Squinted at the ridge. From here it looks vertical. It isn't, replied. Her eyes flicked up just long enough to meet his. Trust me. Kent adjusted her rifle sling, stepping closer. And once we crest, pointed to a shaded hollow marked on her map overlay. There, an entrance hidden beneath an overhang. Thermal bleed from the rock face masks it. Drones can't see it. Scans can't catch it. Only way you find it is if you're standing right in front of it, and even then most wouldn't notice. No one argued, not after the depot, not after the smoke in the hangar. Gear check, ordered quietly. The clicks and thuds of magazines, slings, and straps carried in a muted rhythm. No one raised their voice. No one joked. The silence was not fear, it was the weight of what they were stepping into. They moved fast but silent. Boots crunched lightly against scree, careful to keep rhythm measured. The desert stretched vast behind them, the ridge looming higher with each step. When they reached the base of the cut, tilted her chin upward. To untrained eyes, it was sheer. To her, the shadows revealed handholds carved not by man but by time itself. She signaled forward. His bulk made the climb look than it was, but he moved with methodical strength. Behind him, soldiers staggered at 3-meter intervals. Slotted herself into the middle of the line, watching both above and below. The climb grew narrower. Stone scraped knuckles, boots searched for hidden purchase. Sweat slicked hands even through gloves. Every so often glanced up, not at the rock but at the sliver of sky, watching for the glint of glass or the shift of rotor shadow. By the time she pulled herself over the crest, the light had shifted toward amber. Shadows stretched long. Below her, men and women clung to the rock like dark silhouettes stitched to the canyon wall. Ahead, the hollow yawned. no bigger than a two-truck lot, its far walls smooth, featureless, except for a slit of darkness barely waist-high. "That's the door," one private whispered. "That's a vent shaft," corrected softly. "Doors recessed, left side." Two guards stood watch in the recess, one smoking lazily, rifle slung, the other adjusting his sling strap, bored, sloppy, undisciplined, but armed. Raised two fingers, then a fist. And Kent ghosted forward, their boots silent over loose stone. One guard choked into unconsciousness before he could exhale his last drag. The other dropped from a baton strike at the base of the skull. Both zip-tied, dragged into shadow. Crouched at the door, the keypad was scuffed, its numbers worn by sand. Old tech, not networked. Reliable. She pulled a strip of polymer from her vest, no bigger than a pen, and pressed it against the pad. Microprongs bloomed, mapping the circuit in reverse. "Open," she murmured. The lock clicked. The team slid inside, rifles low. The air shifted instantly, cooler, metallic, tinged with the faint sting of disinfectant. A narrow corridor sloped downward, lined with low amber floor strips. Sound changed here too, dulled and hollow, carrying every boot step like a ghost down the hall. The team split into two elements, a detachment sweeping left, Kent's detachment sweeping right. Stayed with. The deeper they went, the more the air hummed. Machinery somewhere below. The sound vibrated through boots, faint but constant. At the second junction, voices drifted from a side room. Signaled a halt, peered around the edge. Two men at a console, rifles leaned within reach, talking in low tones. She signaled breach. 3 seconds later, both were down, clean, silent. Weapons secured, no alarms. They pressed deeper, the corridor bending. Ahead, a reinforced bulkhead loomed. Beyond it, faint voices, more than a few, some sharp with command, others weaker, strained. "Hostages." Pressed her ear to the steel, counted at least a dozen voices. Men, women, maybe children. "Manual override," she ordered. The bulkhead groaned as they forced it. The door shuddered open, revealing narrow cells lining the walls. 2 or 3 civilians per room, dust-streaked clothes, hollow eyes. Some surged forward, others shrank back, afraid. "We're getting you out," said. And Kent moved down the line, cutting locks, ushering people into the corridor. Soldiers passed out canteens, whispered quick assurances. A boy no older than 8 clung to sleeve, fingers white-knuckled, eyes wide and wild. "Are you soldiers?" he asked, voice cracked with dust and fear. "Something like that," said. She nudged him gently forward. "Stay close." There wasn't time for more. The route back curved toward the main entry. They moved swiftly, hostages shielded in the center. But before they reached it, a low vibration trembled through the walls. The vents rattled, coughing dust. A sound built in the air, heavy, mechanical. Rotor blades. The boy's grip on her sleeve tightened. Kent's headset crackled static, then cut out. Reinforcements inbound. No comms, no time. "They're coming from the south approach," said, her voice calm but edged. "If we push into open ground, we're dead." She dug into her pack, pulling out 2 stubby canisters scuffed with age. Old tech. Reliable. Saw them and hissed through his teeth, pulling out museum pieces. "They've proven themselves before," answered. She placed the canisters at the hollow's throat, tucking them into the rock's shadow. Wired them to a remote clipped to her vest. The boy watched, wide-eyed, his small face half hidden in smoke-smudged light. Above the ridge, shadows lengthened. A helicopter's bulk slid across the stone, rotor wash churning grit into spirals. Didn't wait, she thumbed the trigger. The canisters cracked with sharp pops, spewing columns of blinding white smoke. It rolled outward, violent and thick, swallowing the hollow, curling skyward in a swirling wall. To anyone above, it looked like a storm blooming from nothing. The helicopter faltered, banking wide. Rotor wash churned the cloud, but the smoke held, dense with heat-treated chemicals that scattered thermal optics into chaos. To sensors, the canyon floor now looked like a furnace where no human shape could be distinguished. Time. That was all it bought, but time was the rarest ammunition they had. Move snapped. The team hustled hostages back up the chute. The climb was slow, civilians stumbling, but no one slipped. Soldiers pushed, pulled, carried when they had to. At the crest, the armored transports waited, engines already hot. Civilians loaded fast, one after another, the last soldier shoving the door closed as swung inside. Climbed into the final vehicle, the boy still clutching her sleeve. She pulled him inside, shielding him with her own body as the transport lurched forward. Package secure, she keyed into her comm. 0 casualties, returning to base. Hale's voice crackled back, clipped but steady. Copy, bring them home. As the convoy turned south, dust plumes swallowed their tracks. Behind them, the hollow disappeared, consumed by its own camouflage of smoke and stone. Didn't look back, she never did. Why was the silence heavier on the return than on the way out? Engines roared against desert wind, armored transports grinding over uneven ground, but inside the cabins the air was taut, brittle. Soldiers shifted in their seats, armor clattering softly, their eyes flicking to the civilians crammed between them. No one spoke above a murmur. Even the hostages, now free, sat stiff as if afraid to breathe too loudly. Freedom was still fragile, still breakable. Sat near the rear, back against steel, rifle across her lap. The boy who had clung to her sleeve on the ridge leaned against her side, exhaustion pulling his eyelids heavy. Each time the transport jolted, he stirred, his fist tightening in the fabric of her uniform. She let him. She didn't shift away. Across from her, stared at her like a man trying to solve an equation he didn't know the variables for. He had seen her steady hands on the bomb, her precision in smoke, her unshaken voice at the map. And now he watched her with the boy, the same hands that diffused death resting lightly on a child's shoulder. He muttered finally, low enough not to wake the boy, "You're not just logistics." Didn't answer. The convoy rattled through the southern approach, dust spiraling behind. Fort's towers rose ahead, cutting sharp against the sinking sun. The gate clanged open, vehicles grinding inside, the heavy metal echoing against concrete walls. The moment the first transport rolled into the yard, medics surged forward. They moved the civilians gently, lifting weak bodies down, guiding them into the triage tent. Soft voices replaced engine growl, questions, reassurances, the sterile snap of gloves. Colonel Hale stood near the center of the yard, hands behind his back, posture carved from iron. He watched every civilian step down, his eyes narrowing as he counted. When the last one cleared, alive, he gave the smallest nod. Relief didn't show on his face, but it sat heavy in his stance. "Not a body bag among them," murmured. "That's a first." Slid out of the transport, the boy following until a medic coaxed him gently toward the triage tent. His hand lingered on her sleeve until the last moment, then slipped free. Only then did she approach Hale. He studied her for a long beat. 0 casualties. I've seen fewer pulled from training drills. It wasn't clean, she said. It won't always be clean. But it was effective. His tone was even, but his eyes weighed more than his words. That's 3 times you've kept this base standing. She didn't respond. She knew too well that attention carried its own cost. Behind them, Kent approached, her face taut with the sharp edge of restraint. "Colonel, permission to speak freely." Hale gave a curt nod. She knew the ridge. She knew the shaft. She's been here 3 days and she's leading operations as if she built the ground herself. "Sir, if you're not asking where she came from, you're asking the wrong question." The yard grew quieter. Soldiers nearby pretended not to listen, but their movement slowed. Every man and woman in earshot waited. Hale's eyes didn't leave. "And what's your answer, Lieutenant?" Kent's jaw tightened. "My answer is she doesn't belong to us, and that means she belongs to someone else. For a long moment, the only sound was the flap of the triage tent, the rustle of canvas in desert wind. Said nothing. She didn't defend. She didn't deny. She simply held Hale's gaze with the same calm steadiness she had shown in the depot. Finally, Hale spoke. She belongs to survival. Until that changes, she stays. Kent's lips thinned. She saluted sharply, then stepped back, but the line of her shoulders stayed stiff. That night the base breathed differently. Soldiers who had ignored her before now nodded as she passed, some with quiet respect, some with wary calculation. The civilians slept in the infirmary, their soft breaths filling cots under dim lights. Walked the perimeter, boots crunching gravel, rifle slung across her chest. The desert stretched silent beyond the wire, stars blistering the sky in cold fire. Each step carried the weight of being seen again, when all she wanted was the quiet of invisibility. At the North Tower, leaned against the railing, scanning the horizon with binoculars. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "You're not Echo read by accident." Her jaw flexed. "No one is. You were supposed to be a rumor." She leaned against the railing beside him, eyes on the stars. "Rumors are safer than truth." He lowered the binoculars. "So what's the truth?" She didn't answer, not directly. Instead, she asked, "Why do you stay in this place? You've seen enough to know the cracks." He chuckled without humor. "Someone has to. If I don't, someone less careful does, and then good men pay for it." She nodded once, quiet understanding, different paths, same weight. A silence stretched between them, filled with the distant hum of generators and the faint buzz of insects drawn to the tower light. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "Echo Red isn't about surviving, it's about disappearing, doing the job so no one remembers who you were. No medals, no names, just silence." Looked at her for a long moment, then back at the desert. "Maybe that's why you scare them. You don't need the stage, but you know how to take it." Below them the yard stirred, a muffled shout, then another. Eyes snapped downward. Two soldiers sprinted across the gravel, converging on the depot. She was already moving. Boots hitting metal rungs, rifle slung, breath steady, followed close behind. The depot's side door banged open, smoke curling outward. Not heavy, not white like before. Black, acrid, chemical. Pushed inside, heat smacking her face. Flames licked along one wall, climbing toward a stack of crates. The fire wasn't wild. It was deliberate, placed at the seam where fuel drums lined the edge. "Extinguishers," she barked. Men scrambled, pulling heavy canisters from mounts, spraying thick foam across sparks. Hauled a drum backward, his bulk straining as he dragged it clear. Grabbed a second, pushing with her shoulder until it rolled free. The heat bit at exposed skin, singed hair at her temples. Sweat cut lines through dust on her face. But within minutes, the foam smothered the flames, leaving only blackened streaks and the acrid stench of burned chemicals. She scanned the wall. The ignition point wasn't random. A thin line of accelerant streaked from drum to drum, painted with careful intent. Sabotage. She rose slowly, breathing hard, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. Someone on this base wanted destruction, and they wanted her too busy saving lives to trace it. Saw her expression. This wasn't an accident. "No," she said softly, "it was." When she stepped back into the yard, the base had gathered, faces pale in the glow of the firelight, eyes darting between her and the charred depot. Colonel Hale arrived last, his shirt sleeves rolled, his face hard. He took one look at the blackened wall, then at her. "Report." Accelerant, deliberate placement. Whoever did this knew exactly where to light it. Murmurs rippled through the soldiers. Hale's jaw set. "Lock down the yard," he ordered. "Double shifts on perimeter. No one moves without clearance." The crowd broke into motion, but eyes still flicked toward, lingering longer now, filled with questions they didn't voice. When the yard cleared, Hale stood with her in the glow of dying embers. His voice dropped, quiet enough for only her. Every time you prevent disaster, the knife turns closer to you. Didn't flinch. That's the price of seeing it before they do. For a moment the hardness in his face eased, just a fraction. And if the knife comes from inside? Her gaze swept the yard, the shadows between tents, the watchtowers beyond. Then it cuts deeper. The embers crackled low, smoke curling into the night. Fort did not sleep easy. And neither did. Why did the base feel smaller the moment the gates clanged shut? Fort had never been large. A rectangle of concrete and dust, a scattering of prefab buildings, towers at each corner. But with the lockdown order echoing across the yard, its walls seemed to close in like a trap. Soldiers moved in groups now, eyes flicking at shadows, rifles held just a little closer to the chest. The perimeter doubled its watch. Spotlights swept the desert in endless arcs. Inside, the air turned heavy. Walked the depot floor, the smell of scorched metal still clinging after the sabotage. Char streaks marked the wall where flames had clawed upward hours before. Her gloves were off, fingertips tracing faint grooves cut into the concrete at the fire's origin. Not random. A hand had dragged accelerant in deliberate lines, bent low, careful. The kind of care that only comes from someone with patience and access. Her jaw tightened. Leaned against a crate behind her, arms crossed, watching. Could been anyone with clearance, he said. That's the problem, she answered quietly. The night dragged on. At the infirmary, civilians slept on cots, medics whispering between curtain partitions. In the command tent, maps lay under floodlights, markers shifting with each whispered adjustment. And everywhere moved, she felt it, the gaze. Soldiers who had ignored her before now tracked her like a flame in the dark. Some curious, some mistrusting, some afraid. She'd been seen too many times in too few days. At dawn, Colonel Hale called the officers into the tent. Stood near the back, her posture quiet, listening. The air was thick with fatigue, voices clipped with strain. The fire was no accident, Hale said flatly. And until we know who lit it, no one leaves this base. Kent bristled. Sir, with respect, if this was inside sabotage, then locking us in puts a match to the powder. It also keeps the powder from spreading, Hale countered. His eyes swept the room. We are compromised, and I don't intend to give whoever's feeding intel another opportunity. A murmur rippled, his brow furrowed, Kent's jaw tightened. Remained silent, watching, measuring. When the meeting broke, Kent cornered her outside the tent. You think you're untouchable, don't you? Met her eyes evenly. I think someone inside your chain is bleeding this base dry. That's convenient, Kent shot back. The ghost unit no one can verify shows up just in time to know every crack in our armor. Then things start burning. Her voice carried. Soldiers nearby slowed, listening without turning their heads. His voice stayed low, calm. If I wanted this base to fall, Lieutenant, it already would have. For a moment, Kent's composure faltered. Then she spun on her heel, her back rigid, boots striking the dirt harder than necessary. That afternoon climbed the North Tower alone. The desert stretched endless, the horizon shimmering in heat. Through binoculars, she scanned ridges, valleys, the long road they'd driven less than 24 hours before. Nothing, just dust and silence. But silence was never empty. A flicker caught her eye, a reflection on a far ridge, quick as a match struck and snuffed. Glass maybe, a scope, watching. She tracked the spot for a full minute, but it vanished into stone. Whoever was out there knew the rhythm of patience as well as she did. When she climbed down, was waiting at the base of the tower. His face was taut. Intercept picked up chatter on the open band, he said. Enemy patrols knew we pulled civilians last night, not suspected, knew, down to numbers. Her stomach turned cold, which means someone here told them. Or someone's systems are bleeding out. Paper doesn't bleed, she said. Gave her a look that wasn't quite agreement, wasn't quite disbelief. They moved together through the yard, checking manifests, inspecting crates. At the depot, flipped open logbooks. Ink marks marched in neat lines, serials stacked clean. But here and there, faint indentations marred the page as though a heavy hand had pressed a pen against the sheet beneath. Invisible to a glance, obvious under touch. She tilted the page, light catching at just the right angle. Letters emerged, faint as ghosts. Codes, frequencies. Someone had used the depot logs to mask transmissions. Her jaw clenched. Leaned closer. That's inside the officer circle. No grunt has time to slip codes into manifests. Which narrows it, she said. But narrowing meant nothing without proof. Proof required patience, and patience had a cost. That night she sat on the cot in her small quarters, the hum of generators seeping through thin walls. Her rifle leaned against the frame. The boy from the ridge, temporarily housed in the infirmary, lingered at the edge of her thoughts, his small hand on her sleeve, the weight of his trust. She closed her eyes, hearing again the hiss of smoke in the hangar, the tick of the timer in the crate, the crackle of fire in the depot. Patterns, each one closer, each one meant for her. The knife wasn't just coming. It was being pressed inch by inch against her throat. Near midnight, footsteps scraped outside her door. She was on her feet in silence, rifle raised, safety off. A knock followed, not urgent, deliberate. She opened the door a crack. Colonel Hale stood in the dim light, sleeves rolled, expression unreadable. "We walk," he said simply. They circled the yard in silence, boots crunching gravel, towers looming overhead. Finally, Hale spoke. Echo Red was a shadow, a unit used when official hands needed to stay clean. Didn't respond. He went on. "I read files I wasn't meant to read. I know what they did to you, what they asked you to carry. No one comes back from that hole." Her chest tightened, but she kept her eyes on the fence line. "You've saved this base 3 times in as many days," Hale continued. "But every step forward draws suspicion like blood in the water. My officers are circling, and one of them is feeding intel straight into enemy hands." She stopped walking, turned to him. "You already know which one." His jaw flexed. "I need more than suspicion. I need to catch the leak in the act." Her voice dropped. "And you want me to be the bait?" His silence was answer enough. The desert wind hissed against the wire. For a long moment she let it wash between them. Then she nodded once. "Set the hook," she said. The following day, the stage was laid. A convoy of crates marked with false designations. Radio chatter scripted to suggest movement at an exposed sector. Just enough bait to tempt a leak into reaching. Moved through the yard as if nothing had changed. She adjusted straps, checked crates, her face calm. But every sense stretched tight, waiting, watching. By dusk, the coded intercepts flared again. Enemy chatter mirrored their false designations, too precise to be coincidence. The leak had bitten. But it wasn't from the lower ranks. It was sharper, closer. When the trail circled back, it pointed not to some nameless clerk or careless radio op. It pointed higher. Too high. And knew the knife wasn't hovering anymore. It was already at the heart of command. Why was the knife always sharpest when it came from behind? By dawn, the base moved with a different rhythm. Soldiers carried rifles, their conversations clipped, as if words themselves had grown dangerous. The lockdown still held, but whispers slid under tent flaps and between watch posts. Everyone knew someone inside had turned. No one knew who. Walked the yard as if her boots pressed against glass. Each step careful, each breath measured. The boy from the ridge sat outside the infirmary tent with a medic, playing with a battered deck of cards. For a fleeting second she let her eyes linger. Proof of survival. Proof the mission had mattered. Then she kept moving. Colonel Hale stood at the command tent entrance, arms folded, expression harder than stone. When he saw her, he gave a slight tilt of his head. A summons. Inside, the map sprawled wide again, markers scattered like pieces in a game that no longer obeyed rules. Leaned over the table, his bulk tense. Lieutenant Kent stood stiff across from him, lips pressed thin. Hale spoke without preamble. The intercept last night confirmed our bait was broadcast. False designations, false convoy numbers. They picked it up within an hour. Kent's eyes flicked toward. And how convenient that it happened right after we let a stranger lead our planning. Didn't flinch. Convenient that the leak knew which frequencies to use. Those aren't on depot manifests. They're in officer channels. His gaze darted between them, his jaw tight. Hale's voice cut through the tension. Enough. The traitor isn't guessed, it's found. We'll set a second line tonight, a deeper bait. He tapped the map. A phantom cache. Coded orders will mark it for movement at 200. We'll station a listening team North Ridge. Whoever signals, we follow. Kent bristled, and if nothing happens, then we keep squeezing, Hale said. His eyes swept the tent, pausing on, until the leak has no air left. That night the base held its breath. Crouched in the shadow of a fuel drum near the North Ridge outpost, headset pressed against her ear, sat a meter away, his rifle cradled, eyes locked on the horizon. Static hummed soft in their ears, broken only by the steady thrum of generators from the base below. Minutes dragged, an hour, then another. The desert was a void of starlight and silence. At 1:47 the band crackled. Not wide-open chatter this time, not sloppy, tight, precise. Phantom cache 2000, confirmed movement. The voice wasn't distorted by distance. It was close, inside the wire. Stomach tightened. She tapped shoulder, signaling. He keyed his recorder, locking the frequency. Another voice bled through, an answer, the kind that carried weight, command weight. Confirmed, cache movement green. Not a private, not a clerk. An officer. His eyes widened, the sound hanging heavy between them. They didn't move, didn't breathe. Let the signal run its course. Then silence returned, thicker than before. At 200 the phantom cache convoy rolled out. Empty crates, empty manifest, nothing but bait. At 2:20, gunfire erupted in the valley north of the ridge. The enemy had taken the hook. By dawn, the firefight was over. Bodies lay scattered among rocks, but the base's bait had done its job, proof undeniable. Back inside the command tent, Hale listened as replayed the recording. The voices crackled through speakers, unmistakable. Eyes stayed on Kent, not accusing, not blinking, just waiting. Kent's face stayed stone, but a bead of sweat traced her temple. When the second voice confirmed movement green, every officer in the tent stiffened. The tone was crisp, authoritative, familiar. It was Kent. It was Hale. The silence that followed was jagged. Soldiers shifted uneasily, eyes darting between the colonel and the recorder. His brow furrowed deep, confusion shadowing his face. Kent's lips parted, disbelief flickering. "Sir," but said nothing. She studied Hale's face, the smallest twitch at the corner of his jaw, the flicker of his eyes. It wasn't surprise, it wasn't denial, it was something colder. Control. Finally he reached forward. With calm, deliberate hands he switched off the recorder. The crackle of static died. "No one leaves this tent," he said quietly. The weight of command in his voice was heavier than any shouted order. His pulse stayed steady, but inside her mind turned sharp. Hale hadn't it. He hadn't explained. He'd locked the air around them with silence and fear. Kent's voice trembled for the first time. "You're saying the colonel." "I'm saying nothing," Hale cut in. His gaze flicked too, "except that sometimes survival demands what loyalty doesn't." His words hung heavy, twisting. Stepped forward, his bulk squaring against Hale. "Sir, I don't understand. You've been here longer than any of us. You've held this place together." Hale's expression didn't shift. "And I'll keep holding it together. But you don't hold the desert by standing still. You hold it by making deals no one else will admit exist." The truth bled cold into the room. Deals, compromise, a survival stitched with betrayal. Kent's hand twitched near her sidearm. His eyes caught it first. She shook her head, a small motion barely perceptible. Not yet. Hale's gaze returned to, steady, calculating. Echo read, "You of all people should understand. Sometimes the only way to win is to walk with both sides until one burns out." For a moment her breath caught, because he wasn't wrong, not entirely. Echo Red had lived in shadows between enemies and allies, cutting lines until no one knew which side they belonged to. But those shadows had cost her everything. "Colonel," she said quietly, "deals like that don't end in survival. They end in ash." Something flickered in his eyes, anger maybe or memory. Then it was gone. He straightened, voice firm. "This tent is dismissed. You'll hold your tongues. If the enemy believes I serve them, they hesitate. And hesitation is the only weapon we have." Officers filed out slowly, unease thick in their steps. Lingered, his eyes locked on Hale, confusion warring with loyalty. Kent stormed out, her jaw tight, hands fisted. Stayed a moment longer. Their eyes met. No rank, no titles, just two ghosts bound by choices no one else could see. Then she turned and walked into the dawn. The base was awake now, soldiers stirring, the sky bleeding pale gold. But for the ground beneath her feet had shifted. She had seen the knife, and it wasn't just inside command. It was command. And the question wasn't whether she'd survive it. It was whether she'd choose to. Why did silence sometimes weigh more than a bullet? The desert was pale with morning light, shadows stretched thin across the yard. Soldiers moved stiffly, their eyes restless, their boots striking harder than necessary on gravel. Lockdown had bred suspicion into their blood. Every glance lingered. Every motion carried an edge. Stood by the depot, her shadow long against the wall. The scorched marks of the fire still cut black into the concrete, a reminder of sabotage and betrayal. But this morning, betrayal wore a sharper face. It had a name, a rank, a man whose word carried the weight of steel. Colonel Hale. She could still hear his voice from the night before, low and unshaken. Survival demands what loyalty doesn't. A sentence that cut deeper than any knife. She had seen men justify death. She had seen them hide behind orders, behind chain of command, behind silence. But this was different. This was the base itself held together by lies. And she was standing inside those lies, breathing them as if they were the desert air. Approached from the north tower, fatigue etched across his face. His jaw worked as though grinding down thoughts he couldn't swallow. "You believe it, don't you?" he asked finally. She didn't turn. "I don't have to believe it, I heard it." He leaned against the wall beside her. "Hale saved this place more times than I can count, you know that." Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "And he sold it just as many times. Only difference is no one saw it." Let the silence stretch. The sound of generators, the bark of orders, the scrape of boots filled the space. Finally, he muttered, "If you take him down, this place tears itself apart. Half follow you, half follow him. Enemy doesn't even have to lift a finger. And if I stay quiet, then the rot keeps eating." Both options tasted like ash. Later that day, Kent cornered her outside the infirmary. Her eyes burned with the sharp edge of fury barely restrained. "You knew," Kent hissed. "You've known since last night." His voice was steady. "I know enough." Kent's hands clenched. "We can't let him keep command." "And what happens when you accuse a colonel without proof they'll accept?" countered. Kent froze because she knew proof wasn't enough. It had to be the right kind of proof. Signed, stamped, irrefutable, and Hale was too careful for that. "Then what?" Kent asked. His voice softened. "We survive." Kent's eyes narrowed. "That's not an answer." But didn't give more. She simply turned and walked away, her boots steady against the gravel. That night the base felt still. Floodlights painted harsh white against walls. Shadows stretched like bars. Sat on the edge of her cot, rifle resting across her knees. Her hands were still. Her eyes were not. In the dark, the boy from the ridge appeared in her thoughts again. his small hand clutching her sleeve, the weight of his trust. He didn't know about traitors, about deals struck in silence. He only knew that someone had pulled him from the dark and told him to stay close. Sometimes survival wasn't about carrying truth. It was about carrying people. At 300 she moved. The depot was quiet, the yard nearly still. She slipped into the command tent. The map was still spread across the table, the markers like silent witnesses. Hale stood alone, sleeves rolled, studying the ridges by lantern light. He didn't look up when she entered. "You should be asleep." "So should you." For a moment silence. Then he set the marker down, his eyes lifted to hers, pale and sharp. "You're going to ask me why," he said. "No," replied, her voice was soft. "I already know why." He studied her, searching for something in her expression. He didn't find it. "You think I'm a traitor," he said finally. "I think you're a man who decided compromise was easier than blood," she answered. "But compromise bleeds too. It just takes longer." His jaw tightened. "You can't keep this place alive with purity. You keep it alive with deals, with hesitation bought in shadows." She stepped closer, her voice low. "And how many shadows have you fed? How many knives have you turned toward your own, just to keep your balance on a line that was never solid?" The lantern flickered between them. His eyes didn't shift. "You'll expose me?" he asked. She didn't answer. "You won't," he said quietly, "because you know what happens if you do. This base fractures, men die. The boy you carried from that ridge dies, and their blood is on you." Her chest tightened, not because he was wrong, but because he was too close to right. "Then why tell me?" she asked finally. His voice was steady. "Because I wanted you to understand what command costs. You don't have to like it, you just have to live with it." For a long moment neither moved, neither blinked. Then reached up slowly and adjusted her collar. The crimson fabric caught the lantern glow, the black insignia stitched sharp, echo red. His eyes flickered at it, whether with memory or warning or respect, she couldn't tell. "Echo red doesn't carry names," she said. "Doesn't carry metals, it carries weight, and when it's too heavy it buries you." His gaze didn't shift, neither did hers. Finally she stepped back. "I won't expose you," she said softly. Relief didn't show on his face, only understanding. "But don't mistake silence for loyalty," she added. "Silence is survival, and survival is temporary." She turned, her boots whispering against canvas, left him with the map and the lantern and the weight of his choices. Outside, the night air cut cold against her skin. Stars burned sharp, the desert vast and unending. She stood still, breathing it in, letting the quiet press heavy. Behind her the base still moved, guards on towers, medics in tents, the hum of engines ready if dawn demanded it. Life carried on, fragile, temporary. Found her at the north gate just before sunrise. He didn't ask what passed in the tent. He didn't need to. He only looked at her, searching for an answer she didn't give. Finally he asked, "So what now?" She adjusted her rifle strap, eyes on the horizon. The first line of light was breaking, spilling across stone and sand. "Now," she said quietly, "now we keep moving, we don't stop, we don't look back." The sun rose slow, painting the desert gold. The boy from the ridge stirred in the infirmary, alive for another day. Soldiers shifted in towers, weary but still watching. And the base, fractured though it was, stood. Walked the yard, her shadow stretching long behind her. Not a hero, not a savior, just a soldier who had chosen silence over fire for now. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.